Hey everybody. I'm Bill Wolkoff. I'm executive producer, writer on Kipo, and I'm just gonna lead you into like how I wound up connecting with Rad and how we made the show. I was set up. I'm a TV writer. I worked on shows like before Kipo. I did superhero animated shows and shows like I was on Star Wars Rebels, Tron Uprising. So, and Rad is a story artist that previously that works in features, who made this incredible webcomic. And I was buddies with the DreamWorks people, and they kind of set us up on a work blind date. They sent me Rad's comic, and I completely fell in love with it. And we sat down with each other, and I had to pretend like, yeah, I think it's pretty good, that like you do on a first date sometimes, and told Rad my thoughts on how we could work together to expand it into a TV show. And that's how we all came to be. And Rad, do you want to talk about your background and how you came to?
So I'd been working at DreamWorks for I think 9 years, and I'd always been pitching stuff, and finally Kipo got bought by DreamWorks and was in development. And I come from a storyboarding and art background, so when I met Bill, to have such a talented writer was really, really awesome to collaborate with and even learn a lot from. So we got together, and then we started hashing out and kind of taking it from the spawn of an idea and building it into a TV show.
Can you share, Ben, can you share my screen? I'm going to show you guys some fun stuff to start us off.
You should be able to share screen right now.
Oh, great. Now I got to do it. Great. Thank you, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, here we go. And Rad, pipe in,
For sure.
as we, oops, are you guys able to see this? Hang on.
We see your full screen, so the drawing is in the middle.
Great. So Rad, this is your first concept for Kipo.
Yeah.
That's what you want to.
I'll describe a little bit of what. So at the time, I was working on the sequel to How to Train Your Dragon, and I was doing a lot of these compositions and visual development and stuff for these like giant dragon characters and tiny Vikings. And I was like, man, this stuff's fun to do, but I can't show any of this. So I was like, well, maybe I'll do like an original piece of artwork that I could share online for fun. And so I drew this thing. And I remember I just kept looking at it. Like it was always on my background and I just was like, it just started the spark of an idea of what like a post-apocalypse show where animals mutated out of control. And at some point I'd wanted to do a webcomic, and I was debating between a couple different projects, like a couple different ideas, and I pitched them to my wife at the time, and she's like, well, you got to do this one. I like this one the best. I was like, okay, I think this one is the best one. So at the time, I quit my job for a little bit to work on the webcomic. Let's see, should we?
And I just want to point out something fun. I don't know if you can see me zooming in. Rad has hidden. I just discovered this. What is that, Rad? What's that little walrus?
Plastic walrus.
That's Rad's company. I just love little fun Easter eggs like that. So
also in the show, Aang put it in the background sometimes.
Yeah, Aang hid some fun stuff in the background. So I'm gonna pull up Rad's webcomic next, and just to give you guys a sense of like where everything started. I think this is here we go. This is the very beginning of your webcomic.
Yeah.
And you did this in your spare time. You did this. I'm just going to flip through it while we talk here. But Rad, you did this in your spare time while you were working on, while you were story art. Or no, you left. Pardon me. You left.
So I tried to quit and they asked me if I'd work 2 days a week. So I'd work on Boss Baby Monday and Tuesday. Then I'd wake up at, early in the morning and work on this all day, Wednesday through Friday.
So this is what my reps sent me your comic. DreamWorks reached out to them and said, "Hey, we love Bill. We've talked to him before. Would he be, maybe he'll be into this." And by the way, just side note, these are obviously very early designs, and in Brad, in your original conception, I'm zooming in on Wolf. Wolf was Mexican American. And obviously that evolved. Things evolve a bit, from development into TV show. And oops, pardon me, I have a wheel spinning. So hang on, let me escape out of that. There we go. Computers. Anyways, as I am escaping out of it, I will I'm gonna stop share and then go back into it for a sec.
Other things that were different, she never had any kind of powers, or she didn't have any mutant. She was just like, it was more like Walking Dead. They were just a group of kids trying to survive an apocalypse.
There we go. Yeah, and so this is what I saw, and I'm, I think you could tell that even though things are different, Rad's style is still very much I think we captured the spirit of your drawings in The Ultimate Show, which was my dream. As I was reading this, I thought, wow, this it's really a wonderland. It's an apocalypse that is an awesome place that you just want to explore and see more of. And your art style, you have this kind of angular art style, and this amazing very striking use of color that is so distinct. And I thought, I've got to work on this show. This panel here feels very much Walking Dead to me. This one right here, kind of the early frogs with humans. And another fun fact: this bearded guy, that's the original Benson.
That was my buddy I used to work out with. All the backgrounds too. I'd go for a run in the morning in Los Feliz, and they're all photos. I would take a photo as reference and then try to imagine it overgrown. And so you'll see sometimes like the Shakespeare Bridge or different buildings you might recognize or locations you might recognize in LA.
I apologize again. I unshared because my shared screen. I'm going to stop zooming in on stuff as much. Let me go back into this now. But anyways, I think this gives you all a sense of what. Oops, hang on one sec. Sorry. Share screen. That's what I want to do.
I also want to give you guys some advice about why I did this as a comic. I'd been pitching stuff for years, and I always found it hard to pitch. And the first thing I ever sold was a movie based on a comic book that had been published. And I kind of just found that if you're going in to pitch an idea, it's really, really hard to sell it. But if you have an already published comic, even if it's a web comic, it suddenly becomes less difficult to sell your IP. So that's a little advice I have. Like if you want to make a movie or a show, make a web comic, make a children's book, even a written book. It's really helps if the studio wants to buy it for a lot of different reasons.
There's original Dave here.
Yeah.
And Brad, this bridge, this was partly inspired by the Shakespeare Bridge, right?
Yeah.
Which that was another thing that made this partnership work. Both Brad and I live on the east side of LA, and I recognized a lot of my part of town in this comic, and I was very excited to get to work with you on that for that. Living in the same area. So then we started working with each other, and while we were working with each other, there were several pieces that were made. This is a painting from Helen Chen that we used to help sell the show to Netflix eventually. We developed it for about a year together, building out the story, building out the characters. And I had these amazing pieces of artwork for inspiration. Here's another one.
So this one's by Ryan Lang.
Yeah, Ryan Lang. And you'll notice some early designs, like that's the early Wolf, early Dave. Even Benson is a little bit proto there. And that poster, interestingly, wound up being the basis for the first piece of actual show art that we released publicly. Here's the same painting done with on model. Dave looks different. Here's the Wolf from the show. Here's Benson is more on model that we landed on. Ryan also did this incredible painting of Timbercat Village and Ryan, I believe, came up with the idea that the entire village was, correct me if I'm wrong, Rad, that the entire village was carved, the trees were carved out to look like cat furniture. That came from Ryan. And that's what we ran with, as we built out the show and filled out that world. That got me my wheels spinning, like, oh, what an incredible world. But cats get stuck on the top of trees. And what if their leader was this awesome, Viking type leader who had been caught at the top of like a 300-foot tall tree? And that was kind of the birth of Yum.
The genesis of the outfits was, there was a coffee shop by my house, Intelligentsia Coffee, and the baristas dressed like lumberjacks. I just thought that was funny. Like they all had that outfit, even the little pinstripe suspenders and stuff.
So I wanted to show.
That makes sense that this would be like an LA hipster thing.
Yeah, that was the peak of hipsterdom back then.
Yeah.
So after a year, we had a show Bible, a script, a ton of development artwork, and Rad and I went into Netflix to convince them to make our show. And in preparation for that, this is a fun thing to show. We just did a mini opening shot. There's early dubstep bees. Here's an early Mandu coming in. Ground shaking. And that was kind of an early way to, a very early prototype font for Kipo. And that was how we introed our pitch to Netflix. We did that. Brad narrated that opening shot, and then we went into our spiel, explaining, talking about the characters, showing bits of Rad's comic, giving a very brief synopsis of what the pilot episode would be, and talking about the world beyond that. This, just coming back to Helen's painting here, this painting captured the spirit of like what we hoped the show would feel like. So this was a major piece in helping to sell Netflix on the show. And we wanted to make sure that when we delivered the show, it looked like this painting, that they had a show that fulfilled the promise of what this painting was. And that was very hard to do. Another just little fun fact, the main, I think when Rad, correct me if I'm wrong here, when you were first storyboarding the beginning of the pilot, you put Kipo's name in the clouds, kind of like what Helen did here. And that then evolved into our signature opening title sequence, where we would find Kipo's name in different pieces of the environment. And it kind of started with this painting here.
Yeah.
So then I'll show you some early development artwork. Once we had you saw what Kipo looked like in the web comic. Now, how do you make Kipo animatable? And what is she going to look like?
So
here,
I was at the airport. We were flying out to Korea to go meet with the animators, and I still hadn't got a turnaround that I liked yet. And I think I drew these in the airport waiting to get on the airplane. And I finally, like when I design, I always go from my gut, like I feel sick when I draw it. I hate it. And then when I don't feel sick to my stomach anymore, I'm like, okay, that's the one. And it just took me a long time before I got something where I was like, okay, this one doesn't make me feel sick to my stomach. I'm cool with this.
What was it about this one that like?
It's purely just an emotional response. Like I'll draw it and I just feel I don't like it, And then finally, when I draw something where I don't have that response, I'm like, okay, that's good.
Interesting. You just go with your gut.
Yeah.
Something we learned is like once you have emotionally like the right poses and the right look, there's still more to it. We went through a lot of different versions of like ultimately what Kipo's outfit would look like. Here's a very early version of her shirt, and this is Kipo without her bracelet and without her pin. And I can't remember why that one got shot down, but I'm glad we ended up with what we did. Here's another version of the shirt that we did. This one I remember. Margie Cohen looked at it and said, "Wait a minute, that looks like the Magic Castle in front of Disneyland. Different studio, don't do that." So that one didn't fly. And eventually, after going back and forth, we found the right
pants.
Yeah, and we also experimented with giving Kipo some ripped pants, and ultimately decided against that. But just fun to like see what all the different versions that we went through. Here's a very early lineup before we had fully landed on Kipo. I think Benson, Wolf, Dave, and Mandu are pretty much set at this point. But Kipo, we really went back and forth before we found just the right exact lineup for her. Here's a early Leo outfit, Burrow outfit for Kipo's dad. Once we knew that we had Sterling K. Brown cast in that role, we that definitely affected his ultimate look. Here's an early Wolf turnaround, and this one, I there's also a ton of early development Wolf artwork, but you've kind of seen the process by watching Kipo. So, but this is an early turn here. I also think it's fun to look at an early Jamak. This pose, obviously he evolved quite a bit. His eyes are different. Something fun I like about this rad is that he's got little flies in his tie bar there. Nice. So all universe Jamak, had those flies, and that you can see. The pose was so great. We kept the pose, and Jamak evolved it into more the Jamak that we know from the show.
Just out of curiosity, simultaneously while all this character design is happening, is story and other things that going on at the same time?
Absolutely. I'll jump. I was going to jump into that afterwards, but
okay, no worries. I don't want
to. I think we had boarded the first 2 episodes before we were doing these. Right.
That's right. We did storyboard 2 episodes. And that happens sometimes. You storyboard episodes before you have your designs finalized, and it looks really weird. Like when you look at those, the story artists get used to the way they're drawn in the early stages before we finalize our designs, and then gotta shift them out of like no, that's old Wolf. That's not the Wolf we're doing anymore. As you move on, and then they get used to it, and then it's fine.
Yeah.
Here's an early Scarlemagne. I think this was your first Scarlemagne, Rad.
Yeah.
Before we got on, that was when we thought we would have a mask on him covering up his scars. And as Scarlemagne's story evolved, so did his look. Here's some early Yumyan Hammerpaw poses. I think these were the first poses where we were like, yes.
Now these, did Keiko do these?
Yes, Keiko did them.
Okay.
Is Yumyan, Rad, is Yumyan in the house right now?
Yeah, my door is shut, but he's around here somewhere. My cat, Yumyan.
Just another fun fact. It was incredibly hard to animate the plaid on the cats. So the Mir did an amazing job of the plaid never moves even while the animals move, but the way they animated it, you almost don't notice it. You have to look very closely to see that. But they, at first when we showed them the plaid, they said no plaid.
Yeah.
That's early. That's when we landed on the designs for Yumyan and Molly. There they are. And also when we were animating, we would do a lot of special poses like this one. Here's Yumyan hissing when he's on the music standoff with the Timbercats. I mean, with the umlaut snakes.
And I'm guessing either Dan or Chibu probably did this one. Does it say at the bottom?
I think this was Dan Holland. If I'm,
Dan,
I should say at the bottom there. Or no, it's not. Oh, that's approved by Aang. It doesn't say who did it, but that looks like it's Dan's work.
Yeah, it's either Dan or Chibu.
But we would send these special poses when we would see a moment in the script that was very important emotionally. And since Mir is all the way in Korea, and we couldn't just walk into their office, we would send them these poses to give them like a guideline of like, here's the level, here's the emotional scope of the acting that we want for this moment. And we tried to do as many of these as we could for the show. Here's Pierre. I think this was when we were experimenting with like showing Pierre being translucent and that you could see the
this was the hardest character to design because it was like, how do you make something look like a flea? Like you recognize it's a flea and also kind of cute and kind of gross. Like,
I mean, I think he's adorable.
Yeah, he is adorable. Why did you name him Pierre?
It felt right. Like, he's your regal steed. He was Yumyan's regal steed, even though he was a giant flea. So Pierre felt fitting. I think that was why that was my episode. So I got the pleasure to come up with that name.
Yeah.
I think this one is Chibu's design here. Here's an early design for Scarlemagne's flamingos.
Wow.
And was it you or was it Chibu who came up with the idea of putting the car over the flamingos' heads, which I
thought that was you.
I might have been. I don't even remember.
Yeah, I think it was you, or it was Chibu, and I just assumed it was you.
And that's I'm glad you brought it up that way, Rad, because just for everybody listening, that's a big part of how the process happens. Like there are individual people who come up with things, but it's when everybody comes together. And we tried to foster an environment on our show where there was an open door between the designers, the story artists, and the writers, so that we were all. And Rad and I fought to make sure that it's rare in kids animation that the writers get to be on location with the designers and with the story artists. It usually doesn't happen. And we insisted, and happily they agreed to that. There was a little bit of pushback on that. But that's how you get like this kind of an idea like this, is when everybody is working with each other, everybody gets to know each other and feels safe with each other. And we build our ideas on top of each other. And it's something that's hard to create, but like when you can get that, you get, you can really build out the universe in ways that are just unexpected, that no one individual person would really be able to do on their own. So I hope I get to work with the team on this show 1,000 times more, because they're all so good. So here, I'll jump ahead to, I'll do backgrounds after I do story. I'll shift gears just a little bit here. So while all this was going on, we were working on stories. And what I'm pulling up here, this is, these are the actual cards that I used to plot out the pilot episode. And at that point, that's my dog chasing my cat. You might hear that, guys. Come here, Oatmeal. When Rad and I, built out the world together, and we had a Bible, we had a kind of rough idea of how to do the story. At that point, it was only the two of us. We didn't, yet have, this was before we had even sold the show. So we were just developing it at DreamWorks, and it was just me, in my office, writing these cards and beating out the story. And then I would bring Rad in, and I would pitch to him, and he would give me his notes.
I think we met at the coffee shop, right, in Atwater.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's across the street from Proof, and I'm forgetting the name of it all of a sudden. But yeah, we met at this regular coffee shop all the time, and I would be pitching him story areas, and this is the process in a writer's room. You kind of come up with a rough one-page concept for what you want the show to be, and then you really start breaking the story. And you do it beat by beat. Each card is a separate scene, these are all the original cards that we used. And the story evolved a bit from this here, but even looking back on it, a lot of the structure is still really the same, I'm happy to say. So this just gives you an idea of like what the story process is like on a scripted show. It's different on a script-driven show. It's different on a board-driven show, that 11-minute shows. But Rad and I had always envisioned Kipo as a serialized story, one continuous story. And I don't know how to do that in a board-driven fashion. I think you have to like really plan out the stories in the writer's room. But once we got going, even when we were breaking stories in the writer's room like this, we would bring in the directors of the episodes to give their input. So everybody had input at the stage when we were doing this, when we were beating out the story. In the first stage, it was just me and Rad, but then obviously that got a lot bigger. We had a full writing staff. We had story artists. We had directors, and even designers that would come into the writer's room as we were doing this process. And that's just another sign of like how important it is to have writers, on site. And you can see these are originally we had envisioned the first two episodes as one continuous episode, one kind of special hour-long episode. So teaser through Acts 3 are what is now known as Burrow Girl, or episode 1 of Kipo, and teaser through Act 6 is what is now known as Explosion Berries, or Kipo episode 2. So that gives you a brief, idea of like what it's like when you're writing on your own. And then once we had a staff together, we could go into the writer's room, and this is here's just the picture of Rad and I together before, like, I think this was like right before our writers started. This was our writer's room before we had, work up on the walls everywhere, and we didn't really take a lot of pictures of those walls for legal reasons, because we were writing the stories years before the show was even announced. So
we got kicked out of this writer's room for being too loud, and we moved down the hall to a different writer's room.
That's right. And here's just an idea of like what the board, like the dry erase board, looks like once you have like more people working on it. Like it just, things get a little bit messier. Lots of ideas are thrown up, on the wall and all different places. Like at one point, like we thought, at the top of this board here, you see Tesla slug. We thought, oh, is that how they power things in this world? Like, are there, little mini slugs that are filled with electricity? So that's just an example of early ideas that we tried that we ultimately didn't use. This is the writer's room board for episode 6, which wound up being called Ratland. And that just gives you guys an idea. And then once the writers, once as a room and as a team, so it would be our entire writing staff led by our story editors, Christine Sonko and Joanna Lewis. We would come up with these stories. Rad and I would come in and we would run through them. And once they were approved, we would assign one individual writer to go off and do an outline and do a script. And then once that script was written, the entire writer's room would workshop the script with input from everybody, all the creatives on the show to make it, as interesting and unique as the scripts could be. And just as a little fun aside in the writer's room, you also get lots of writer's room doodles. I'll show you some of these. This is when we were talking ideas out, we would Rad would just come in and doodle, and we were all trying to figure out how in the world is a snake going to play the guitar. And Rad's like, it can work, and we're like, how? And then
the way I remember it is someone just says, and the snakes play guitars, and I went, what? They have no arms. What do you? Wait a minute, and then I'm like, wait, maybe this could happen.
It might, yes, it could have. Forgive me if I'm remembering it the other way, but somehow you did this doodle and made the possibility of snakes playing guitars work. And like we would come up with characters, like we knew that like Scarlemagne was going to have all of these apes, all these gorillas and orangutans in his food court / palace. So that Rad would just be doodling early ideas for like what they look like, or sometimes just totally random silly stuff, like this one here. Rad revealed at a certain point that he's afraid of birds with because he doesn't like the beaks. So like how do they kiss? And then Rad just drew a bird with lips in the writer's room. This is an early concept, Yumyan, who has been cured and turned into a kitten. I think you drew this in the writer's room as we were talking about that, and we all said, "Oh no, that's so sad, that's so adorable," and the design I think stayed very close to that. Rad also doodled the narwhals as we were talking about them in the room, and this happened almost instantaneously, and that's like the advantage of having an artist like Rad, who is an incredible character designer, who can just translate these ideas in, when he's inspired, into the most incredible things. I think these guys final designs are actually pretty close to this initial doodle here. Here's some early Mulhollans that you drew. Here's some when we were discussing Beak in episode 8 in Twin Beaks, Rad drew this, and which I still find terrifying and hilarious. It still makes me giggle uncontrollably when I look at that doodle. Here's an early design of what a mutated Dr. Amelia would look like. We didn't wind up going with this one, but
this was an idea that she's not as good at science as Song. So when she tried to make a Omega, it went horribly wrong.
And I think Christine just sent me something. Here, I'm just going to pull these up. Sorry, they're upside down. Christine Sonko, one of our story editors, she has the most beautiful handwriting and character doodles here. And I apologize that they're upside down. They're upside down here, but she just sent them to me. But this is just also what the writers are doing, as we are talking about stories and episodes, like just lots and lots and lots of doodling. And sometimes writer doodles look like chicken scratch. Sometimes they're beautifully colored, like what Christine did. She has these, she came up with different like fonts for all of the characters that we were coming up with, like, the Chevra sisters and, the Mega Jaguar and, themes that we were talking about for the day. So I think that this is all kind of fun stuff to just give you an insight about what it's like to be inside of a writer's room. And once we have a script and it goes off to storyboards, and then a story artist takes it, and I think a lot of you might be familiar with that, but just to give you a little glimpse, here are some storyboard thumbnails from Yasmin Kudari, who was one of the story artists on the season finale for season 1, Beyond the Valley of the Mega Dogs. These are some of her original thumbnails for here's the our gang on the flea. There's this thumbnail here that my arrow is on, like, became so popular that like it wound up it's like a screen grab, like in its final form now. So I think it's kind of fun to look at the very, very early versions of some of these poses and some of the acting that gets worked out here. And then the last thing I'll talk about before we take us off of this, I want to really give due to Angela Sung, our art director, who has done just such an incredible job filling out the backgrounds and filling out the world and making it a real big world that we can actually live in. I mean, from the second that Aang, came on board and started talking to Rad, she applied her kind of plein air style that's her background to making these unbelievable backgrounds. Here is the first background that Aang submitted to us, and it's what wound up in the show just almost exactly in this form. And it still is incredible to me today. That's the Great Clover that's protecting.
She might have collaborated with one of the painters too on this one, right?
That is true, and forgive me if I'm forgetting that detail, but we also had Wayne and David Wayne Tsai and David Merritt.
I think David might have painted this one, and Aang might have drawn it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it starts with line art, and then it gets painted. And I think Aang, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Rad, she sought out painters who understood the plein air style that she
just hired people from her plein air painting group. Like Wayne had never worked in animation. He was an architect. He just painted with her on the weekends. And Wayne actually did the very first painting of the hallway to set the style of the show. And he'd never even worked in animation before. I don't know if you have that painting. It's like where they're coming down the hallway, of the office.
I don't know if I have that one on my computer right now, but I know the one you're talking about. That's when Rad's talking about when Wolf and Kipo are on the lily pad going into Jamak's office in episode 1. I think you're right, Rad. That might have been even before this one. But this was very close to the like the very beginning, and like seeing that in conjunction with this, that would like gave us a real sense of like, oh, this is what the scope of the show could look like. And if we can do this for every episode, it'll feel epic. Here's another early painting of the flower stairs where Kipo found the dubstep bees, and that's this obviously it started with line art, but this painting came not long after that, and DreamWorks and Netflix got more and more excited about the show as this background art came out. I do have a little bit of line art here. This is from a background I think that we ultimately didn't use. And I think one of the reasons that I kept this particular background is because she hid my name there, and we all like seeing our names and things. I'd like to think there's a Wolkoff Street somewhere lost in Kipo land. But this just gives you guys an idea of like what here's, and even the line art is amazing, and then it evolves into that afterwards. But there is, you know, such a difference between this and going into that. And then we would, you know, start putting our characters into the backgrounds to like see if they fit. And there was a lot of design work that went into making sure that these amazing characters actually pop off of the backgrounds that we place them in.
Bill, did you ever say Taniko actually, do you remember when Taniko animated on top of these backgrounds just to see what it would look like moving?
Yes, I do. Let me, you know, I'm gonna take us out of the share mode here, and if you want to talk about that right for a second, because I think I do have that. Let me see if I can pull that up.
Yeah, we worked with this animator Taniko, who I'd worked with at DreamWorks for years, and I always loved like that kind of French Gobelin style of animation. So that was a lot of the influence for the background and the drawing style. And so he just took a pass at like what it could look like, trying to get the drawings to look like that kind of a style, to show the animators in Korea kind of like a starting point for what we were thinking. And I'm also a huge fan of the Miyazaki stuff, and a lot of one of the painters, Ben, you probably know him, because I bought a painting from him, but he worked on Kipo, but he also was a painter at Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, Yoichi Nishikawa.
Yeah. So that was another painterly influence for the backgrounds.
Here, I found that one of Taniko's drawings here. I'll share that with y'all now. I mean, one of his early animations, excuse me. All right, and here he just put Mandu into several different backgrounds.
Man, I still want to do a feature like this, you know, where it's fully animated. Because he's doing tons of in-betweens that you don't have the budget for that on a television budget.
It is the difference between, you know, there are tricks that we have to do to, you know, make it producible for a television schedule. And Taniko was delivering feature level animation. So that is a little bit of a glimpse into the background of how we made this show, how we wrote it, designed it, drew it, and I think, I don't know, Ben, if you want to open up the questions or.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was awesome. I have a couple questions I'll ask from questions that were submitted to us first, and as well as some of my own. My first question is: it seems pretty everything that you showed me in the comic. It seems pretty true to your original vision of the comic. Was there any notes or tweaks from the execs?
The biggest one at the start was they felt like Kipo needed some kind of superpower or something to like elevate her above just being human. And I don't know where we came up, Bill, with the Jaguar thing, but that kind of sprang from that concept. And
it came from one of your original drawings. You drew Kipo with this massive jaguar paw, and then we just ran with that and just figured out, okay, well, that's really cool, and that's like an aspirational thing to get for her to get to turn into. It's not like a negative, so how do we lean into that and build that?
And then the only other thing is I was planning to go dark in the comic. Like I had planned for Jamak's tongue to get cut off when he gets kicked out of the gang. So we obviously kept it in the kid-friendly realm, cut his tie off instead.
Yeah, it's tongues. Yeah, his tongue would have been a little too much.
Yeah. Oh, they also didn't want Benson to be an adult. They were like, we don't really want an adult in the group. Could you keep it all kids? And at the time, I had the skate company, and I was sponsoring a bunch of kids. And I was skating out. Like 2 of the kids lived in Inglewood and Watts, and I was skating in Inglewood a lot. And I just based Benson off one of the kids I sponsored, Isaiah.
Nice.
It does, and that was, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Ben. It was my goal working on this. Like, how do we capture the spirit of that comic and make it feel like, oh yeah, that's the show, so that it doesn't get watered down and turned into something that feels familiar. And we did have to fight on, not fight isn't maybe the exact right word. It was a lot of work to make sure that we didn't rely on animation shortcuts that would make the show look like something you had seen before. And every step of the way, shortcuts were kind of pushed into the world that we had to push back against. And
I'd love to hear an example of what a shortcut.
In a way, because I came from feature and hadn't worked a lot in TV, I hadn't been kind of beaten down into a certain, like anyone who worked on TV, I would board something a certain way and they'd be like, are you crazy? You can't do that. And at first I was like, I guess I should change it. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to ship it like this. And if Studio Mirror calls us up and they're like, dude, we can't do this, then I'll change it. But let's at least let them try it this way. So like things like doing things in one long shot with a camera move instead of breaking it up into little shots, or like showing the feet on the ground plane, or doing an elaborate camera move. And I remember at one point, Mir pushed back on the chase through the skyscraper ridge. And in my mind, I was like, wait, but I could just pull up what's it called? Adobe, the where you fake the 3D stuff. And like, I already knew how to do that. So I was like, I showed them like how to do it. I'm like, you can do this. And they were like, okay, I guess we'll do it. Because they knew they could do it. It's just like, normally shows don't ask you to do that kind of stuff.
Right. So it's like more of like budgetary stuff. A lot of like budgetary shortcuts.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I asked the exact question because it was like distributed through Netflix. I've heard that Netflix is very hands off, and I was just curious what your guys' experience was.
They came on maybe second season, right, Bill?
Yeah. When we, I mean, here's a little inside story. DreamWorks had sold Netflix 350 hours of content. And that was a couple years before they bought Kipo. So then DreamWorks then had to like create 350 hours. Netflix would approve it. And Kipo was the very last, or one of the last shows on that deal. But part of that deal was, and this is just the way DreamWorks wanted to run things, Netflix could give no notes. DreamWorks, like they had to prove like the concept for the show, but like DreamWorks would just deliver the show, and then Netflix would take it and put it on the air. And that was the case with a lot of their earlier shows that came from DreamWorks before Kipo. But then the deal changed after we started, and then Netflix was allowed to give notes. And we were like, are we going to get grandfathered in? Are we going to get to, are we not going to have to take Netflix notes? Of course we did. Of course, they're like, we have some thoughts. And I mean, to their credit, like they had some thoughts that were big at times. And when they had thoughts that were not great, they were usually picking up on something that was a weakness in the show that we would then talk about a lot and address that and make it stronger. And like, to give you an example of that, we were going a little too slow in season 2, and they were picking up on that. And we wound up pushing a lot of big story tent poles a lot earlier in the season because of Netflix's notes. And I think that was the good thing. I think season 2 is incredibly paced for that reason. And we still did get to find time to slow down and have quiet moments for our people, even while the story was moving at a very fast pace.
I see. Okay. Have you started working on new projects involving Kipo? I mean, I know the answer to this. The answer is no, correct?
I'm talking to comic book stuff.
Oh, that's good.
But nothing's been signed yet. Nothing's like official. I do think that will end up happening. Something in the comic book world.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
What was your collaboration like with Studio Mirror? Did a large portion of US team have a chance to travel to Korea and vice versa? Since all the animation was done pre-COVID, did you meet via video at all?
Me and Bill and Eng flew out, and our producer Mike, and
Young, our supervising director.
Young, we flew out a couple times. I'm trying to think. We also met with them on video, but it almost felt, Bill, like once we got a rhythm going, they didn't really need to meet with us on video. They kind of just could do it.
we had pretty long episode launch video calls at the very beginning, which I the goal was like, let them into our heads, since we're not able to work with them in the same space. But then I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Rad, at a certain point we're like, okay, we get it, we don't have to have these long meetings. We're on the same page with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. In the COVID era, do you think there is room for distributed work on a show like Kipo? Are there any departments that would be more difficult to operate in a remote work environment?
I mean, for the last year, I've been working on another project, and we worked right through COVID like nothing happened. And Bill too. I think you're on another project that you just, nothing we do necessarily requires a studio. It could all run fine from home.
That's good to hear.
I will say I prefer a live writer's room over, or not. It is live, obviously, on Zoom, but I prefer a writer's room where we're all in the same space. It works, but there's a little bit of Zoom awkwardness that is just kind of counterintuitive to human nature. And when you have a writer's room, like, a lot of the story break is fueled by the rhythm that everybody builds with each other, and it's harder to build that rhythm on a Zoom, but it's possible. And I'm grateful that technology has allowed us to on other projects continue to work in writers' rooms. But personally, it's just more fun to be in the same room with everybody.
Yeah. Were there any character designs that you absolutely loved but couldn't make it into the show for whatever reason?
Yeah, we had kind of a wall of characters that didn't make it, right?
Let me see if I can find the tailor. The silkworm tailor was an early idea that we had for who is it that's drawing all of or who is it that's sewing all of their clothes in this post-apocalypse? Well, there's a silkworm. I think I have him somewhere in here. Okay, I think I got him. Maybe go on to the next question, and I'll come back to showing you silkworm tailor.
Let's see here. We have, how much of the look and feel and character design from Rad's original webcomic beyond the conclusion of the webcomic? How much more of the world needed to be built? It seems like, well, how much more of the world needed to be built, and how did you divide the responsibilities? It seems like a lot of it needed to be built.
Yeah, I had my starting point was more like Walking Dead. You just kind of have this group of kids, and they run into this group of people, and then they walk over here and run into that. And Bill the first thing we met was coming up with a big main villain and a big main arc, and obviously incorporating the Mega Jaguar elements were never in my mind in the comic. So Bill kind of like expanded it like quite a bit, you know.
How many pages was the original comic?
30?
I think about 30.
Around 30.
I scrolled through the whole comic, and you know, that is like an inhuman amount of work for one person to do. Like Rad was inking and lettering and doing and coloring. I mean,
how long did it take you, Rad, to do that comic?
You know, it would take me a whole day to draw it and another whole day to color it per page. So I'd wake up start working at 9, take an hour break, and then work till 6. And I'd have a drawing done of the whole page. And then the next day I'd take the whole day to color it.
Interesting.
All right, I got the Silkworm Tailor. I'm going to do a quick share screen here. All right, so this is a early poster that eventually evolved into the first actual release poster. But this is what the early poster looked like with you know, our heroes on the Dragonfly, and hiding over here, you can see the Silkworm Tailor. There he is, near and dear to all of our hearts. We talked about him in the writer's room a lot, but we never got to do an episode with him. One day. All right.
Okay, I have another question here. What mythologies, if any, inspired the making of Kipo?
I mean, the original Genesis was inspired by, like I mentioned, Walking Dead, but also Game of Thrones and the different worlds, like kingdoms almost. And I guess when I was thinking Jomok's tongue was going to get cut off, I was a little inspired by the Jaime Lannister character getting his hand cut off and having sort of a redemption arc. I just liked that idea that you'd have a villain that kind of would come back around to being good.
Yeah.
So I always knew Jomok would go through some trauma and sort of almost join our group.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
When I came on board, I wanted to I loved that as this you know, our foundation, and there were two other big mythological influences for me: Alice in Wonderland. And I think that was there, even if Brad hadn't articulated it. I felt like Alice in Wonderland was very much in, you know, his web comic, and the Warriors, the 19 early 80s Walter Hill's The Warriors. Because when you think about like this world, it's 200 years from where we are right now after society has fallen. So there is no government. And it's one of my favorite movies when I was a kid because it was both fun and dangerous. And that's what, you know, that's something I wanted to bring to this world, make it feel fun and dangerous at the same time, where you have all of these competing gangs, you know, on this wasted urban landscape. And that's pretty much what Walter Hill did with, if nobody's seen the 1980s Warriors.
Yeah, no, I see it now. I totally get that influence. Let's see. What happened to Troy's mom, though? That's one of the questions.
Good question. I feel like there was a budget of how many actors you could hire per episode, or some reason why sometimes there weren't certain characters, you know, or how many designs you could do per episode. There's all these budgetary constraints. Unless was that like on purpose that we never showed his mom?
I mean, that's that motivated it. But even that said, you know, we did try to always make sure that when we were, you know, when budgetary constraints, you know, weighed on us, that we made it feel real in a way. And it's hard to explain every single nuance and corner of the world, but we tried to lay it out in a way that, like, that's a great question, by the way. And I think it opens up, you know, the potential for more story in this universe. If we are able to continue to tell the story of Troy and Benson 5 years later, you know, the story of Troy's mom could absolutely be a part of that world. And I think that's the potential of, you know, even if every single question has not been answered or tied up in our 30 episodes. To us, that's just the potential to build this universe even more.
Sounds good. This next question, I kind of know the answer to. I can maybe jump in a little too. Will there be a Kipo art book?
I almost think someone should just make it, and DreamWorks would never notice.
I would love to try it. I would love to try that. I think if we made like a zine type of book where it was just all the sketches, that could be an easy one versus like a full blown art book.
Yeah.
But even just like a small zine book of just sketches would be kind of cool. But yeah, we'll talk about that.
I mean, once you uttered those words, Ben, I look down at the chat and I see, take my money, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Do it. So
it's a licensing issue. It really is. Just comes down to us being able to license it. And I've told Rad I've tried to reach out to the NBC Universal team, and we're probably just too small potatoes for them or something.
Yeah, I think unless it's a multi-million-dollar deal with Hasbro or something, you can't even get a meeting. It's like, It's a little frustrating.
Yeah, it's different when it was DreamWorks. Now it's like NBC Universal as well. So let's see. What would you say is the most important thing to make sure you have in a pitch deck when meeting an animated children's show to a network? When pitching an animated children's show to a network?
I think my number one piece of advice is a lot of people will tell you what's popular. A lot of people will tell you what they think will sell. And if you're trying to chase that, I mean, maybe that'll work. I don't know. But I think you should just try to pitch what you absolutely like or what you absolutely believe in, and not really worry about anything else. And because like people will tell you all kinds of things, and if you try to chase that, I think it's gonna weigh you down. So yeah, I think as long as you truly believe and love what you're pitching, that's really all that is. Every exec's gonna be different. One exec's gonna be like, I only want this kind of thing, and another exec's gonna be like, I only, you can't like set a blanket rule of what to bring in.
Can't please everybody.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. Also, I would add that chasing what you think people want, it's a moving target that moves all the time. So you have no idea even what you're firing at. And it is about caring about the story. And I would add, find your personal connection to that story. And I mean, for me, I'll just talk about Kipo for a second. When I read Rad's webcomic, in the webcomic, Kipo is a character who wears her heart on her sleeve in a world that is dangerous and cynical, which is how I feel. That I felt like I connected to that character immediately. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is, I mean, you look at me, everybody on the Zoom looking at me, I couldn't look more different than Kipo, and yet is the character I relate to more than anybody in the show, except maybe Scarlemagne. So take that what you will from about me. But that was a big, connection to me. And I carried that through everything, in the way we pitched it, in the stories. That was a mantra for me. And Kipo for me became a show that I had wished I had when I was a kid. When I grew up, and Brad and I have talked about this a lot in interviews, so sorry if you've heard this before. I grew up in the early 80s when nuclear war felt like it could be a reality. There was like a very scary period in the early 80s, that for an 8 or 9-year-old is truly terrifying. And I wished I had a show like this that showed young kids surviving, a larger than life threat and finding a way to find wonder in the world despite that. So those were my two personal connections to this story as we were pitching it. And I think it's the most important thing that you can have. Like just one other example that I think is I always find very helpful. I've heard Alex Hirsch talk about Gravity Falls a lot, and you look at Gravity Falls, and people think it's it's described as either Twin Peaks or X-Files, for young kids, which there are so many people who had pitched that network said no, 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 no 1,000 times, dude. Like, we've seen a strange town where strange thing happens, like, boring, the next one, and so when Alex goes in to pitch that, there's every expectation that they're going to say no, but what they really bought was Alex was telling the story of what two identical twins growing up, with together is like, in this world of magic and crazy promise. Because Alex is a fraternal twin, and that was his personal connection into that world that made Disney TVA say, "Oh, now I want to do a show about a strange town where strange things happen," even though I've just heard 50 pitches of that in the last week alone. And I might be missing some of the actual details of that, but I've heard him talk about that, and I've heard Disney execs talk about that. So that's just a good example of a way to find your personal connection into the story. Networks might not buy it, but if you have that personal connection, and then you hear about, like, as you're bringing it out, like, you might hear, Amazon is looking for a story that has elements similar to what we have, and I have this story and it's got my personal connection, and that's just going to make them all the more excited about it.
Yeah. I also will say, no one can stop you from making your project at the level you're able to make it at. So people always think there's like this wall, like, I can't make my project unless somebody buys it. But it's like, you could make it as a comic, you could make it as a children's book, you could write it as a novel. Like, just make it to whatever level you could make it at, but make it. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody can stop you. And then if a studio wants to come along and add money and take it to another level, that's great. But, like, get that out of your mind of, like, this thing, it's like, I have to go out and
right. You don't need permission.
Get it told,
Yeah. No, that's great advice. That's great advice. I'm going to get to some of the chat questions now, but before that, I wanted to comment. I really, how do I say this? Like, I thought the casting choices were all really excellent. The music choices were all really excellent. Can you guys, like, what inspired those choices? There's definitely something to be said about the diversity of the cast and the music. Can you comment on how that came to be?
I grew up a skater, watching skate videos, listening to Wu-Tang and rap music. So it's always been a huge inspiration. Like I mentioned before with the casting, like, I was skating with skaters in Inglewood and Watts a lot, and just being like, oh, this is LA that we never see, So it made sense to me at the time, like, if this show is set in LA, this is going to be a diverse cast. Bill, do you want to talk more on that, on just, like, when we were casting and music?
Absolutely. I'll take casting first. Looking at Rad's webcomic, I said, this is the Los Angeles that I know. When you go into the borough, and it's only like 4 or 5 panels in his webcomic, it's this beautifully diverse cast that represents the LA that I think the reality of LA. So for me, coming into the show, it was really exciting to get to do a show that reflected that diversity. That, in a way, you're seeing more and more of it now. But when we started the show back in late 2000, I think we met in early 2016, somewhere around there. There weren't a lot of animated shows that had main casts that were diverse, that had somebody biracial in the lead. That was, we wanted to really carry that out, and DreamWorks supported us on that. So that, good on them for that. Like, unless you have studio support, and studios will sometimes say, well, they're just, and it's, I don't think this comes out of a bad place. Sometimes it might, but studios will often say it's harder work to find a diverse cast. And they did not say that this time. It just means that they have to do more work because there are some studios that will just rely on their lists that they always have and the safety from relying on those lists. And on our show, went off all of those lists, and our casting director did a lot of work to expand, the types of talent that we normally would have to choose from. It's what we wanted, and they supported us on that, so, which is really good. But and then with music, we got to tell this story that is a reflection of our world, and a lot of our musical tastes overlap. I mean, I grew up listening to Beastie Boys and loved Wu-Tang, and I listened to musical theater and classical music, and I love music. I love music from all genres, and since we're telling a story about a world that is a reflection of our world changed, it felt like having the music of our world in all different places of our world was extra important, and it was really cool to get to use a lot of that music as using needle drop as score. Like, for example, in the episode where Jamak is driven out by his gang of mod frogs, you hear this. The name of the singer is Yvonne Devaney, and it sounds like an old Patsy Cline song. And that becomes the score for that whole sequence. It's not just, and it captures the emotion in a beautiful way.
We should talk a little bit about too, like James Cartwright and Kier, were our music supervisor, and as well as our composer Daniel.
Yes.
But we would throw in a song like Hurt by Johnny Cash, and be like, obviously we can't afford this. And then James would bring us that song, that I Cried 1,000 Tears, and you're like, wow, this is just as cool, and I've never even heard of this song.
And that was a real 1960s Southern love ballad. So it captured, like the same feelings as Hurt did.
Yeah. Nice. All right, keep moving here. All right, I'm taking questions from the chat. See, I still wonder how the Daves got killed.
The mystery. They've never told us. There's a lot of stuff on the show that every writer and myself had different conflicting theories on. But unless it's like even like how the mutant outbreak happened, or like everyone kind of has their own theories that we don't state explicitly in the show. So like I know different people have theories on how Daves get killed.
It was a lot of fun also because Dave, I think we can all agree, is not the most reliable narrator. But I also, I think Dave is just clever enough to like not reveal the secret to ending him. We all, on that subject, we did talk. Somebody might ask, how did the Great Mutant Outbreak happen? It's a question that comes up a lot. There was a scene that we wanted to put in the show that we were never really able to. We just didn't find a place for it. But I'm going to use Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds just for a moment. I'm guessing a lot of you might not have seen it. Some of you might have. But in the movie The Birds, simple plot, birds just start attacking humans. No explanation why. And like after like 2 hours or an hour and a half of that, there's a scene in a diner where all of the main characters are together and they all talk about their opinions of why the birds attack. And all of it, like everyone could be right, but none of them are really, the real reason. And then one character turns to another. They blame Tippi Hedren, like they think it's her fault. but she's looking directly at the camera and says, I think it's your fault. You're the one who's making the birds attack. And it's Hitchcock's way of pointing to the audience and saying, you did this. It's because you want to see birds attack people. That's why they're attacking us right now. And we talked about like having like a scene like that where just Benson and Wolf and Dave and Jamak are, you know, all talking about their theories of how it happened, or it might have been Jamak. I can't remember. You know, we had talked about it and we just couldn't find a place for it. But if we had done that scene, it would have been similar. Like people would have had theories, but nobody would have really known the real reason.
Let's see. People, yeah. See here, the crew was wearing stuff like Benson's sweater. Where do we find these kinds of things? I know people have been asking for like the Mondu plush, the sweater. Those are all crew gifts.
Yeah. I know people make stuff and sell it on Etsy, but yeah. I encourage everybody to go do that because otherwise there's no way to get anything. Right.
There's a lot of unofficial stuff out there. Feel free to go and get it.
There is an amazing Benson's backpack on Redbubble that somebody made, and like it, you know, but you know, you can get an amazing Benson's backpack out there. Yeah. Not DreamWorks, you know, licensed, but
I'm gonna start working on a cruising at some point. I'll contact you guys for a bunch of sketches. Let's see here. What was the reason to change lumber cats to timber cats?
Legally, it was taken.
There's a band called the Lumbercats.
Yeah.
That is a little glimpse into how the sausage is made. But I will add to that, like whenever we did have things like that come up, we always tried to make sure that the name that, you know, Lumbercats does, you know, seem like the most, you know, the obvious choice, but we always tried to make sure that our next choice felt as awesome to us as the first one. Sometimes we were successful in that, maybe not as successful in others, but there you go.
Let's see. Question is, Rad mentioned that it gives more possibilities to sell an idea. This is about like putting your comic online. Possibilities to sell the idea story if one creates a serious comic online, but I was wondering, is it possible to protect the idea somehow?
I had a mentor, this guy named Jeff Lynch. He was head of story on Iron Giant, and he worked on all the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And he went to college with Tim Burton and a bunch of other people. And I remember he was telling me, he's like, you know, there's a group of us at CalArts, and we all had these ideas, and we would get offers. And be like, they're not paying me enough money, or they want to change it. And we all like held on to our ideas. And Tim Burton was the only one that was like, yeah, sure, whatever. You want to pay me $10? I'll sell that. Oh, you want to change it? Yeah, whatever. And he's like, and then like later, we were all in our 40s and none of us had ever sold our ideas. We just had them. They never went anywhere. And Tim Burton was over there making like millions of dollars doing everything. And he's like, just sell your stuff. Like, get it made. And that always kind of like stuck with me. Like, if you're trying to like hold on too tight to stuff, you may end up never getting anything done. So I just say put it out there, just get it done. Like don't worry. Like if you really had to, you have proof it was online. It's marked at a certain date. Like if someone steals your idea, technically you could take them to court and you have proof that your idea was there first. But I wouldn't let that be the thing that's stopping you from making stuff, you know?
It's about the totality of your work too. Like I could not agree with that more. There are a lot of smart people in the world, and I have no doubt that a lot of the people on this Zoom have a lot of brilliant ideas, but I've been through it a million times where other people will come up with very similar brilliant ideas, you know, at like a similar time. It's just a similar time. It's just the nature of the world. One brief, and you just have to keep doing the work and putting it out there. I had a live action TV show pitch for a a world, like it was about a town where it was kind of like a Pied Piper thing, but very dark and twisted, about this town where suddenly every single child in the town disappeared overnight. And I had a studio, and I had a director and a producer attached to it, and we were in CBS pitching the idea. And when and the CBS director's executive, after I pitched the idea, was on his computer, and he says, "Oh, they just sold Leftovers to HBO. That's really similar to this." It's like that just happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, and that may have been an excuse, honestly. Like maybe he didn't love it. That did happen. Like that was just announced in the trades while I was pitching it. Just as an example of like, I that was a story that meant something to me. I had a personal connection to it, but it was putting it out there. And the most important thing was the relationships that, that like you build. And I work for CBS now. Like, that executive who said that is my boss right now. And it's, he, even though he didn't buy that idea, I'm a writer that he wants to work with. Like, and that's I think that's what we all want to be doing is working in this business.
I'll say too, Kipo is one of 6 ideas that was in development. So that like I had a movie that was getting made and then just disappeared. They're just like, yeah, that's not gonna happen anymore. You're like, oh, okay. And then TV shows are like, I think this one's gonna sell, and then no, we have another thing just like that. So that's another thing, is be pitching a lot of stuff. It's not just like, this is my baby, because the thing, like you said, like actually the movie, I think it was called Luck, and it was being made, and then some other studio, Skydance, announced a movie called Lucky, which strangely enough was by the same executive who left DreamWorks that was working on my project Luck, went over to Skydance and made a movie called Lucky. But then they canceled it because it was too similar. So that type of stuff happens all the time,
Yeah. Let's see. How did you decide to include Korean elements in the show, including the narwhals, while making it all seem so naturally fitting without directly addressing the language intersection?
My wife is Korean, and she every day reminds me that Korea is the best. So, and nothing compares to Korea. Has been drilled into my brain. We also go to BTS when they come to town. She's a huge K-pop fan.
Some of our other writers' room writers were K-pop fans also. So and another, it was like the narwhals was a kind of a weird chocolate and peanut butter type situation where we had one of our writers loved narwhals and had been talking about finding a way to create a mute narwhal from the very, very beginning. And then another one of our writers is a huge BTS fan. And I think Brad, you and Maggie have been out with her, like to the concert.
We were at the same concert, but they were in a different area. But Maggie still chats with Christine about, whatever new songs coming out from BTS.
And I can't remember who it was on the show, but like we were both of those things, narwhals and BTS, were just in the atmosphere, and then somebody smushed them together, and we went.
Nice. How did you all narrow down on the animal species you wanted to put in the show, and was it hard to do so? Were there any mutant groups that didn't make it into the final show?
I always tried to avoid like a very obvious choice and try to steer it in a weird direction. So like, I'll give you one example, was like the chef shrimp from the Brunchington Beach episode. I really wanted, like, if you go to any restaurant, you'll see a drawing of a pink shrimp with a chef outfit on, right? So like, if I'm starting there, I'm like, that's a thing I've seen a million times. What can we do to get it out of that? And so like, I'm like, well, first of all, we're just not going to make the shrimp pink. And then now let's do, like, when you're in LA and you go out to a restaurant, a lot of times they have these like the chefs are like have tattoos and they're like very cool kind of. So like we gave the chef like neck tattoos and stuff, like just to, how do we get it away from the typical kind of thing you've seen a million times? Or like another example is the theaters. The concept was like there was talk of making them dressed like the classic bard, you know? And I'm like, okay, I've seen that before. So how do we get that left of field? And it was like, well, what if they're the classic like LA actor with the wide brim hat that you see walking all over Los Feliz? They're at the coffee shop always during the week because they're, you know, they're not working like a real, any kind of normal job. They go to their acting auditions and they have giant scarves. And I'm like, yeah, let's go with that kind of a vibe, you know?
When we came up with Mulholland was one of the earliest, you know, creations once Rad and I started collaborating with each other, and we were considering making Mulholland the big bad before we came up with Scarlemagne, and like we knew we wanted to do this huge water bear, and that, you know, controlled water, and like play it like a trickster god, playing like a trickster god. And then it was just talking it out, and I can't remember how. Like somehow Bob Ross, which you know, was in on our minds. Like oh, what if that trickster guy kind of had the vibe of Bob Ross? You know,
I think you pitched it to me as, was his name Q from Star Trek? Well,
yeah.
I just realized now, maybe whoever's behind the Q conspiracy is a Star Trek fan. But you were like, yeah, what about, I want this like trickster god like Q, but he's like a water bear that can control water, the shape of it, get in people's minds. And I was like, dude, this is freaking amazing. That's a great idea.
I forget how Bob Ross came into that, but like somehow that became an operating principle with him. Like that felt like the right personality for him.
Yeah.
Nice. So who made the in-universe self-portrait of Scarlemagne in early season 2?
The painting you're talking about?
Yeah.
It might have been Aang. Might have painted that, but it also could be one of the painters. I don't know. I feel like Aang painted it.
Is it possible that, I know he was a revisionist at that point, but was it, would James have done that? I feel like I saw him doing it at one point, but I could be misremembering.
It's possible he drew it, but I think one of the painters would have painted it. I feel like Aang painted it, but I'll have to double check with her.
It's probably right.
Let's see. I think we'll probably have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. But let's see here. I think I read this about Scarlemagne's decision process before, like making the connection between Mandrel's colors to like the colors of French nobility outfits. But then I also read that Scarlemagne was originally a mute bat. Could you talk more about his design process? Did he start as a bat and turn into a mandrill?
He started as a mandrill.
Yeah.
And then we had second thoughts at a certain point. We just considered maybe making him a bat who was a sommelier with blood. And then, you know, that was, you know, sometimes like you talk, like when you think about decisions that are going to be big and affect the entire series, you talk them out a lot. And then Rad drew this amazing bat that wound up becoming the conspiracy theory bats. But then we went back to, you know, like the original thought. And what's interesting about Scarlemagne, Rad had done a drawing that I had never seen before. So when we started talking and we were talking about the big bad, and I can't remember, like I wanted somebody fun and performative is the big bad. So I you know, I was like coming up with many characters to pitch to Rad, and like that could be this big meat bad. And Scarlemagne, like a big influence for me was Tom Hulce from Amadeus, and Joker was, you know, and jumping off, and like mandrels are so striking with their colors and they do have pheromones that can influence other mandrills. And well, we're in a world where animals are mutated, so let's run with that. Like his mutation goes, like, you know, he can really control people with his pheromones. When like, it just felt like French nobility, like taking over like an old mall, like cheesy mall food court, felt right and in the world. So then I pitched this to Rad, and then Rad shows me a drawing of a human cannibal dressed in French nobility.
I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but in the comic, I had these humans who dressed up like French nobility with powdered wigs, and they put powder on their face, and they lived in Winnebagos that they traveled around, and they ate babies. And in the comic, when you see the baby crying, they were collecting what they thought was a human baby to bring these like weird cannibals. Like I mentioned, the comic was going to be a little darker, but it ended up being the baby form of Dave. But yeah, I had these drawings like of these creepy cannibals that lived in Winnebagos and dressed like French nobility.
Interesting.
So you just hearing that, like that we were both, like our minds were both in the same general area. We're like, we gotta, you know, it's gotta be in the show then.
See, I'm just gonna read this one out. Was there a reason to design the main cast as certain races, seeing as they're predominantly POC? I'm not sure I understand.
We did do an open casting for certain characters where anybody of any race applied, and so we would have retrofitted designs if we, you know, according to whoever had applied. With Kipo, in my mind, Kipo was Korean, and we had even started animating, and her dad was going to be a Korean actor. And Chris, our director, after we were kind of into production, he was like, hey, I want to make Kipo's dad black, because I think it'd be really cool to have like a black role model. And Sterling K. Brown at the time was like, hey, you guys, I'm interested in animation. So we were like, I kind of left it to Chris. I'm like, is that going to be weird, Chris? Like, she's Korean and her dad's black. And he's like, I don't care. I want to see a cool black dad. And I was like, all right.
Then we went out to, you know, Sterling K. Brown, and he had just, I think, he won a Golden Globe and an Emmy, and then suddenly he was in Black Panther, and I said, there isn't a chance in the world he's going to want to do our tiny cartoon. Sent him this pitch for what his character would be with some artwork, and he said yes, and we said, well, okay, this is awesome. We've got Sterling K. Brown as Kipo's dad, and that, you know, that's kind of the full picture of how that particular casting choice came
and he was the dad we all wanted. He would come in and just tell us stories about his kids, and we're just all like, man, this guy is such a sweetheart.
In season 3, when he says "hasta la pasta" after he's leaving everybody, that's what he said to us the first day of recording. He just said "hasta la pasta," and we're like, we got to use that in the show.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much our time. I want to thank you guys all again for joining us, and especially thanks to Rad and Bill for that very insightful, very entertaining talk.